Hello everyone, Alan here with our Discovering Buddhism class. Thanks for being there. Good day to be at home. There's nobody actually in the room today. I didn't expect them with all the rain, but if you can watch at home, good, very good. So our fourth and last class on Bodhichitta, how to develop Bodhichitta. So we'll look at particularly at the practice of exchanging self to others, changing self for others. Tonglen, it's called in Sanskrit, exchanging self for others. And then we'll do the practice later on. So we'll start as always with our 5 minutes breathing meditation, mindfulness meditation. So get comfortable and sitting, lying, whatever's the most comfortable position to relax the body and the mind. Let's do it. Okay, we're doing our breath meditation, mindfulness meditation. We tend to spend a moment checking in, what's happening inside, what's happening in our body, what's happening in our mind. A moment to reflect on our great fortune to do some practice together, study the Dharma, do some meditation and make some progress on the path of full enlightenment for the benefit of others, all sentient beings. Come in, welcome. We're just doing 5 minutes breathing meditation. Okay, good. So just coming into our inner world. Starting now with our body, making sure we're relaxed. The spine's reasonably straight. Shoulders relaxed. Eyes can be closed or just gently open. Can use our out breath to breathe out all the tension in the body, all the tension of the day, busyness of the day. Have a sense of letting go. And then giving more attention to the breath, just watching the breath, how it enters and leaves the body, nothing to change, nothing to judge, just watch. Gentle rhythm of the breath. Just staying with the breath. Checking now and again whether we're still on the breath or have we wandered. If we've wandered, that's okay. We just let that thought go. Patiently come back to the breath. Staying with the breath, full flow of the in-breath, full flow of the out-breath. Okay, just relax. I've got a spare copy of the notes. Shall I find it?
Yes, please.
Okay. What's your name again?
Michael.
Michael, yeah. You've been before, haven't you?
I have, yeah.
Not for a while.
Not for a while,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think I remember you. Just going to slip out and get a glass of water in case I need it. So
Okay.
I'll be back in a second for people out there. I've got a few people online. Some people online and one in the room. Okay, back again. So, are you on the mailing list, Michael? Do you get this? You get the notes each week?
Yep.
Oh, good. Okay, that's great. So, just to start off, we might just have a look at those questions. Hopefully, I actually emailed this morning the notes and then also the answers to the questions because most people go to home and we don't get to have much discussion. So they're the set answers from the Discovering Buddhism writers, the people who write the course. So I think they're slightly different from the ones I've got here on the page, but some of them might be the same. It's just a way of just reviewing what we did last week. First 3 points of the 7-step cause and effect compassion practice. This is what we looked at last week. So this is the meditation, analytical meditation, where we use our relationship with our mother as being an example of the very close, loving, compassionate relationship to extend, recognize how strong and loving that relationship was and still is, if we've still got a mother. And then, so that's the first one, recognizing that all beings have been our mothers. So this is the big step for people who are new to Buddhism because it involves reincarnation. and accepting that we have all been each other's, we've all had past lives. If we've had in uncountable numbers of past lives, we've had uncountable numbers of relationships with every other being, including mothers, fathers, enemies, friends, and so on. And so we pinpoint the mother relationship that logically all beings have been our mother at some time in the past, if we accept that past lives exist and there's no beginning or end to them. There's an end if we actually become enlightened, of course. So we focus on the mother relationship, and then the second step, the kindness of the mother relationship, which probably most of us have experienced. If we haven't had that experience with our mother, we can use another person who's been very close to us, who helped us in our life, and use that as an example of a loving, kind, compassionate relationship. And also recognize that there has been uncountable numbers of other people who've had that close relationship with us, given us love and compassion. Third one is the wish to repay them. If we recognize this close relationship with all beings, particularly the mother, we want to do something for them. Fourth one is to give them happiness, to actually wish them happiness. So the first three are the causes: recognizing beings our mother, recognizing kindness, wishing to repay them. So they're sort of like the trigger. And then the next four are just how we respond. First of all, we should respond with wishing them happiness. So remember, we looked at what the Dalai Lama interestingly explained what happiness is, many different types. He said you should include the worldly happiness, the wish for them to have enough good conditions in food, shelter, clothing, healthy life, safety, success in their career. So all these types of happiness that ordinary people want should include that. But we also recognize that that is temporary happiness, and there's bigger sorts of happiness. Second one is emotional peace, having a sense of contentment, satisfaction, less anger. So when we sometimes succeed in our practice, we might feel that we're becoming less angry, we're becoming more patient, so more less inclined to harm and be angry, more kind to other beings. So emotional peace, he calls that. And the other types include meditation, feeling of peace, meditative states, when we're having a sense of strong concentration in our practice. This can give us a feeling of strong bliss. So if we've experienced that, we can also wish, even if we haven't experienced, we can wish other beings have that experience. And then ultimately we wish them full enlightenment, end of all suffering, nirvana, liberation, the bliss of and joy of never having to suffer again once you become liberated, enlightened. So all that, they're all the types of happiness we wish other beings to have in that step, the fourth step, wishing other beings happiness. The next one, compassion. We wish them to be free of suffering. The other side of loving kindness is compassion, wanting them not to suffer. It doesn't have to be in this order. It can be whatever our mind is attuned to. If we particularly have strong realization of the suffering of other beings, three types of suffering. The obvious type, which is getting sick, getting old, dying. The more subtle types, which is not getting full satisfaction from the worldly pleasure. And the last one is being in samsara, being in a cycle of birth, death, old age, sickness and death, where we actually are in this uncontrolled cycle. So wishing beings to be free of that kind of suffering, the big suffering as well as the immediate suffering. That's the fifth step. Sixth one is that you want to do this yourself. You take responsibility yourself. This is called the special attitude. Number 6, His Holiness calls it the great resolve. Great resolve in making a big decision, a great, huge decision to help all beings without leaving anyone out, being responsible for that, not leaving it up to somebody else, feeling that we ourselves have this obligation to help other beings, relieving from suffering. And to do that, the last one is Bodhichitta, develop Bodhichitta, but that's actually the end point. If we develop strong loving kindness, strong compassion, we start on the road to being a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva, which is a person who's just, their mind is just completely infused with compassion, loving kindness. They're just feeling that spontaneously. And once they on that path, the bodhisattva, they're heading towards enlightenment. There's no going back once they reach a certain level of that bodhicitta. So that's basically a bit long, that answer, but the 7 points. So just to remember what we covered last week and the week before. We did some of those 7 points the week before. Anyway, so if you just want to revise, you can just look back over your notes. What's great compassion? So I've actually covered that because great compassion, compassion I just briefly said was wish for others to be free of suffering, all the different types of suffering. But we also looked at His Holiness the Dalai Lama said great compassion differs from ordinary compassion in some ways, and it's totally impartial. So it wishes compassion towards the most awful person, like could be a mass murderer, could be the Pol Pots or the Hitlers, people who have actually caused unbelievable suffering, and also it covers the person who's totally devoting their life to other beings, the other end of the spectrum. So no partiality, all beings treated equally with great compassion, applying to all ourselves as well, not leaving ourselves out. We need to have a warm, not an attachment to ourselves, but an acceptance of our potential, Buddha potential, that we can become enlightened. So it needs self-confidence. So we need to make peace with ourselves. So we develop the sense of closeness, just like a mother for a child. We feel their suffering, we feel all other beings suffering. And he also says that you need to have this great compassion, you need to have an understanding of the 4 truths, the 4 noble truths, and the 12 links, the 4 truths and the 12 links, which we've actually looked at in other parts of the course. So the more we have understanding of the way we exist in samsara, the way we suffer, and all other beings having in the same predicament, then the easier, more likely we are to be able to develop great compassion, not just ordinary, but great compassion. But he says, you start with the individual, you start people in our immediate world who are having any type of suffering, could be our friends, relatives, people at work and so on. We start with the people in our immediate world and then we extend that, realizing that there are others, infinite number of others suffering as well. So just looking at what is the great resolve, I've also mentioned that. Great resolve is the taking responsibility to relieve the suffering and give happiness to all other beings. So this is what the Buddha mind has achieved. People who become enlightened, like the Buddha, travelled this path. Buddha wasn't always enlightened. There's many stories of him in previous lives doing great compassionate deeds as a bodhisattva, relieving the suffering of others, giving his body to a starving tigress, various great stories about his previous lives where he's been moving towards Buddhahood. Okay, so that's a little bit long-winded reply to those questions. Any questions? Okay. So I just keep an eye on the screen because sometimes people put a comment or a question up on the screen. Okay, so that's basically where we're up to, and we actually did that 7-point compassion practice last week, and the other main practice in the Lamrim to help develop compassion is called exchanging self for others, and this is the one that we're going to look at tonight. Exchanging self for others. This is the one that's most often taught, I think, in most Buddhist centers, Western centers, in my experience. It seems to be the one that His Holiness the Dalai Lama usually teaches when he's teaching on this subject of loving kindness, compassion. And it was taught by Nagarjuna long ago, and was usually a secret teaching because it was. His Holiness says it was kept a secret, not to keep it from other people's knowledge, but because some people found it too shocking, too extreme. Because it's basically saying that we should give all our happiness to others and take all their suffering on us, which is what the Bodhisattva path is. It's what the Buddha did. So that's a very advanced stage, but we need to slowly develop our mind so we can be able to take on that great, brave attitude. So that's what was kept secret, but then Shantideva, the great Indian master who wrote the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, I think it's called The Way of the Bodhisattva, fantastic text. So he gave very clear teachings on how to practice this exchanging self for others to develop compassion, great compassion. And His Holiness says it seems to make a great impact with students these days, because it seems to, I guess because it doesn't, many Westerners are not completely convinced about reincarnation. Don't have to be convinced about reincarnation with this one. It's basically focusing on the commonality, the common humanity, the link we have with other humans, other beings, authentic beings now, that closeness. So I'm just looking at the notes there. His Holiness also says that we don't have to think I am the other person. You don't become the other person and actually physically swap our body with their body. It's not like that. It's a change of attitude. It's a change of putting them as being. If we look closely, we actually usually put ourselves as the most important person, even if we're feeling kindness and compassion. There's this subconscious sort of assumption that because we're us, we're more important. So in this one, we're trying to gradually reverse that, so that our mind immediately thinks the other person being more important than us. It's very much against what we've, for lifetimes, Lama Zopa says this is something that's entrenched in our minds since beginningless time, to putting ourselves before others. So we need to actually change this attitude. And Thupten Jinka, I've got a little note there. He says he says self-centeredness, there's a difference between self-concern, that's the self-confidence, being a friend of ourselves. He thought that, of course, that self-concern, that's important, we need to develop that. There's a difference between that and putting this sort of childish selfishness that constantly thoughts spiraling around ourselves. What's going to be good for me, in the next 5 minutes, tomorrow, putting our own sort of happiness first. And he says this narrows our perspective and actually does cause the mind to actually become suffer, to shrink in its outlook, only looking at this narrow, what's in it for me sort of look. But the other more, the healthy sort of self-concern is that we recognise we have to look after our body, we've got to be clothed and eat and so on, and we've got to have a sense of, a good sense of self-confidence, and our sense of our potential. So this is also important. And so that's the healthy self-concern as against the unhealthy self-concern. Okay. So that's really, this is sort of an introduction. So this practice, any kind of loving kindness, compassion practice, requires a lot of repetition, because we're going against the grain. Unless some people are actually born naturally compassionate, and because they've practiced in the past. But otherwise, we've got to do quite a lot of retraining our mind, familiarising ourselves. We need to use our reasoning to be convinced that this is actually very good for us, putting other people's first. It does go against most of us, goes against most of our natural way of thinking. Particularly growing up in the West, where we're taught to win, to be the best, to always, win the medal and get the best job and the highest salary and so on. It can be very competitive in Western culture. So the two obstacles, I think I haven't got a source of this. I think I've got this from His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The two obstacles to training the mind in exchanging self for others is that thinking that there is a complete difference between me and others. I'm 100% separate from other beings. This is said to be a mistaken way of thinking. He said, what our sense of self and models of self is changeable. So sometimes we might be thinking that what is me is everything I own, my body, all my possessions. Sometimes it could be just perhaps in a young child, this sense of ego or self in a child. They don't have any possessions, but they just have this sense that they are there, and mum and dad are out there, that the other world's out there. It could be a very simple sense of separation of self and others. Or it could be that me in this country, this is like nationalism, patriotism. These people are like me, and they're all 100% different to the people who are in the other country. This sort of nationalism. We need to look after only our country and not the rest of the world. A bit like what was happening under Donald Trump. He used to always be saying, we have to think of ourselves first. So this is one of the obstacles. So it can be between countries, or it could be just between one person and another person. Also, the other one is to think that I'm the only one who suffers, the other person doesn't suffer. So therefore I have to look after myself to make sure I don't suffer. So this is sort of seems very, oh yes, of course, because the other person doesn't feel our suffering. So, but the other person is thinking that as well, remember, because the other person is also suffering. So we're not actually thinking that we are one. This is one. The numbers are also very much against it. We're one, and all the other beings who are also getting sick, feeling anxious, having usual problems in life, they're uncountable, unbelievable number of people. So there's, even if we use democratic principles, the one person should not dictate or override the other, the vast majority. Even if you had a vote, His Holiness says, the vote democratic vote, uh, the vote would always be won by the majority, not yourself, as to who's more important. And if the dictator decided to keep governing against the wishes of the majority who voted, then we'd probably be marching in the street just like they are in Myanmar, and trying to overthrow the dictator who's only thinking of himself. It's quite an interesting comparison. Majority more important than the one. So just on that, there's a quote. I'll just read you that in this book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Praise of Great Compassion. I've got it in the reading list, on the reading list. Shantideva, the great Indian master, addresses this thing about the argument saying, well, I'm the only one who suffers, so I'm more important than others. Although my suffering does not cause pain in other bodies, nevertheless, that suffering is mine and is difficult to bear because of my attachment. Likewise, although I myself do not feel the suffering of another person, that suffering belongs to that person and is difficult for her to bear because of her attachment to herself. I should eliminate the suffering of others because it is suffering, just like my own suffering. I should take care of others because they are sentient beings, just as I am a sentient being. When happiness is equally clear to others and myself, and when happiness is equally dear, not clear, dear to others and myself, what is so special about me that I strive after my happiness by myself alone? When fear and suffering are equally abhorrent to others and myself, what is so special about me that I protect myself but not others? Okay, so that just this argument is very powerful, saying you're always going to be just one, no matter whether you're having happiness or suffering. So how could that be more important than all the other sentient beings? Just in the sheer numbers. So, okay, so they're the two sort of big obstacles. So now we just have a look at the actual practice, exchanging self for others. 6 steps. I'm following, if you read different teachers or different texts, there can be different numbers of steps. And so I actually decided to just use the one His Holiness the Dalai Lama gives in this book, In Praise of Great Compassion. So I think it actually covers all the others as well, any variation. So first one, equalizing self for others. Second step, becoming convinced of the disadvantages of self-centeredness. Understanding the great benefits of cherishing others. Exchanging self for others. Taking others' suffering with compassion. Taking on the suffering and giving our love. So this is called taking and giving meditation. And Bodhichitta. Bodhichitta is the end point after we practice. We don't get it in one session. Bodhichitta doesn't come like that. So, but Bodhichitta is what we're aiming at as the last step. So, so equalizing self for others. So just the terminology varies. Self-centeredness or self-cherishing is what Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, His Holiness the Dalai Lama uses to describe this unhealthy preoccupation with ourselves. Self-cherishing is one Lama Zopa uses the most. Self-centeredness is what His Holiness calls the most. Self-centeredness is probably the one that we probably use more in Western English. Cherishing, we don't use that much really these days. Cherishing, but it means the same thing, self-centeredness. And then selflessness, thinking of others, is another way of saying cherishing others. Cherishing others just means putting others first before us. It needs a bit more than that as we progress. It means wanting them to be happy and wanting to take their suffering. So exchanging self for others. Okay, so they're just the steps. So we'll see if we can get through all the steps before we do the practice. So we need to leave at least about 20 minutes for the practice. Okay, so this is it. First thing, equalizing self and others. So one practice we did, I think the very first class for this one on Bodhichitta was we did what we call equanimity meditation. Equanimity meditation, which is where we look at how we naturally, before we've come across Buddhism, regard people in our lives. We divide them up usually into three: friend, naturally our partners, our love, parents, close relatives, close friends; enemies, those who we find comfortable with. They might hurt us. We might feel just for some reason we don't like these people, so we want to be separated from. And then 99.9% of all the other beings in the world are strangers. They haven't helped us. They haven't harmed us. We don't have any particular thoughts or relation or attitude towards them. So there's three. So that's the equanimity meditation, which is very good to prepare our minds for this loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta meditation. So it's said to be leveling the field. Basically, we look at how we really categorize the three based on whether they help or harm us. So we're in the center. The loving kindness, the loving people, people we love naturally have helped us. Could be by helping give us an education and to raise us as children. Could be just that we have a lot of things in common with them. So that sort of fragile sort of relationship can change. We know that people we're very close to in our childhood, perhaps we don't even see these days. Close friends could have said something offensive to us, and we change suddenly from being a friend to an enemy. We fell out with that person. Or the other way is someone who we've not been comfortable with, has suddenly helped us, be very kind to us, and we actually change our attitude. So we look at the changeability of these categories, and we also look at the strangers, those people who are now friends and became enemies, came from strangers. Right? So those people are like the resource of these close people and distant people in our life. Actually, they all want happiness just like us. They don't want suffering. So there's no reason to have these very rather childish categories of those we like, those we don't like. So that's that equanimity meditation. So this one, equalizing self and others, is different to that. So rather than look at the differences, but how we approach other people, we look straight to what we have in common with yourself there, thinking about what you want, your needs, your one person, and imagine all the other sentient beings in the world on the other side, also wishing the same thing. Okay, both have the right to be safe and free from suffering. Both have the right to have a happy life and be able to make the most of their lives. Which is more important? So this is where the numbers are always going to be on the side of all the other beings, other than ourselves. And this is where His Holiness says, even a democratic vote would always come down on the majority, the vast, uncountable number of other beings other than ourselves. So then there's another. I've got this. We're on page 3 now, about halfway down, and we use 3 points. 2 of those are using conventional truths, and 1 is using ultimate truth to help convince us of the importance of others being more important than self. So conventional truth. Remember when we're looking at the teachings on emptiness, Things exist relatively. So we have a relative self, myself, that is given a name, and everybody recognises that that person exists, and I can recognise that there is somebody here called Alan. But when we look beyond that, using the interdependent nature of reality, that there's no single self-existent person there, we use an analysis. We won't go into the actual meditation, quite a long one. So from the ultimate truth that we can't actually find any concrete person called Alan or whatever person is. So we use the first conventional truth. We look at things from the other's viewpoint, not from ourselves, from others. From others' viewpoint, there are incalculable numbers who want happiness, just like ourselves. And we can also, from the other's viewpoint, they all have needs and desires. They all want the basic, food, good housing, clothing, and so on, all the things that make life enjoyable. Even though the specific wishes could be different, and they all want to be free of pain and illness. So from that point of view, we can't just look at it that only some of them deserve to be free of pain, only some of them should have, good housing, good food. You can't actually rationalise that some deserve happiness while others don't. You can't really find a good reason to discriminate from that point of view. Similarly, from our viewpoint, all sentient beings have been. If we think about our own happiness, if we look closely, we can see that everything we've got comes from others. We don't grow the food; others provide that by growing it, putting it in the shops, packaging it, so on. So every single aspect of our life depends on others for our existence. The physical aspect, or the emotional aspect. They've done many experiments on animals to deprive them from loving kindness, compassion from birth. They take away the mother. The animals have incredibly traumatic psychological problem. Same with human babies. They've found that those who have not received the loving kindness from a parent, mother, or a person close, they suffer mentally. So there's no as givers, we can't discriminate as to who should have more of our loving kindness, compassion. We can't discriminate. And from the point of view of receiving from others, we have to accept that all beings have helped us. Even the enemy, the person who's annoying us and that may have harmed us, that person is said in the Lam Rim to be more important than the friend, because only that person can teach us how to be patient, how to not to react with anger. If we don't have anyone who's annoying us or who is difficult, we can't develop the qualities that we need to develop loving kindness, compassion, and therefore we can't become enlightened. So we depend on other beings in innumerable ways for our immediate happiness and for our ultimate progression to enlightenment, liberation. So then, from the other point of view, this is more logistics. If there was somebody out there who was 100% bad, the person who seems to be annoying it, then everybody would hate that person, okay? And the Buddha would actually recognise that person as being inherently bad. But this is completely not what happens at all. The person who we find is the most difficult person, someone has in their life, that is the most precious person to their partner, their mother, or whatever. So it's not inherently coming from the side of the annoying person. So ultimately, there is no inherently bad person out there. This is using the logic of ultimate truth. If they existed from their own side, also they wouldn't change. That person would always be either 100% good or 100% bad, whereas we know that our attitudes change. The good can become an enemy, the enemy can become a friend, and so on. So there's no inherent quality there that's 100% good or bad. So it depends on a point of view. But this is the just as if we're standing on this side of the valley, this is this side of the valley, and that's the other side. If we're standing on the other side of the valley, the valley that we're on now is that valley. If you think of that, just how wherever we are, it's going to be a different label depending on our perspective. Okay, so this is irrefutable. We can't actually argue with it. It's just pure logic. If we're on here, if I'm here, then you're you. But if you're me, if I'm you on that side, you're looking back at this person. Okay, so I'm not 100% myself, because to that person, I'm not myself. I'm you. Okay, so it's quite. If you just allow that to see, it's described as being dependent. Things exist dependently rather than independently. Okay, so that's using some analysis or logic, using ultimate truth. The next one is looking at the shortcomings of self-cherishing thought. Just briefly, Lama Zopa is very good at this. He says that it robs us of peace of mind. Okay? So the mind is 100% preoccupied with our own welfare, our own happiness. Is not going to be a healthy mind. Nothing will ever be satisfactory. Can never actually make things perfect. So it brings illness. So this preoccupation with own welfare can actually cause physical illness and also mental problems as well. It can create enemies because there's always this tendency. If the person's not helping us, then we have this fear that they're going to harm us, and so there's this thing of this you, me, and them. Okay, so basically, the shortcomings, we can't practice Dharma because we can't make progress if we don't actually recognise the kindness of others, how they've actually helped us. We're not going to actually make any progress in the Dharma. If we want to become enlightened or liberated, we've got to actually do this practice. We've got to do this practice. There's no choice. Because all those enlightened beings who have become enlightened have traveled this path. But His Holiness says it doesn't mean that we always have to be miserable, that we have to sacrifice every bit of enjoyment in our life. He points out very truthfully, very carefully, skillfully, that the path, and Lama Zopa says the same thing, by giving up self, giving up obsessive compulsive concern with ourselves, the mind is actually liberated, this sense of freedom. Lama Yeshe used to say this as well. You just have this sense of relief. You've let go of this thing that you're trying to hold on to, which we can't find anyway. We can't actually find a concrete self that needs to be looked after so obsessively. So we still can have enjoyments. We can enjoy the pleasures of life, but without obsessive attachment and wanting more. When we do experience some pleasure, wanting more of that, that's the problem. So the other one is to think of advantages of cherishing others. So I've just got some quotes there. So Lama Zopa has this way of saying, if you just shift the focus without doing any sort of too complex meditation, but just start the day thinking of others. He says just by walking, sitting, eating, sleeping, thinking that may this benefit other beings, just having a slight shift, which is a huge, it's a small change, but it's a huge shift in a way of thinking, then things become much, we feel a sense of happiness, accomplishment. So things that are done, I'm quoting, unstained by the self-cherishing thought, that becomes pure Dharma. So our mind is actually generating these positive imprints. We call it merit. And all actions aimed at freeing others are the best cause of happiness, quoting Lama Zopa. And so there's also a quote there from Shantideva about how the field of sentient beings is similar to a Buddha field. So if we're pleasing sentient beings, it's actually like working for the Buddha, because the Buddha is 100% working for other beings. So if we're doing the same work as the Buddha, we're pleasing by pleasing sentient beings, we're pleasing all the Buddhas. But it can't have anything more powerful than that. So then the actual taking and giving meditation. So those 3 are sort of like, this is why this meditation is good. And then the actual meditation, Tonglen, is the Sanskrit word that means taking and giving. So we use the breath in Tonglen, and so what, I'm just reading that point. Okay, so it's taking and giving. So the giving is giving our happiness, not just our own happiness, but all the happiness in the world, including things that we may not have, but we might wish for to be. If we're not healthy, we might wish to have perfect health. If we're poor, we might wish to have great wealth. So we're wishing things that our own success on others, but we're also wishing what other people want in terms of happiness that we may not have ourselves. And the actual taking is taking in the suffering of others. So we breathe that in. So even the breath in and out, I'm quoting Shantideva, can become a great method of helping other beings by making them receive the highest, most magnificent state, obtained through the practice of the Bodhisattva's deeds, characterized by Bodhichitta, taking more care of others than oneself. Okay, so that's the Tonglen is using the breath through each in and out breath to feel this wish to take the suffering, and usually we visualize the suffering of other beings as black smoke coming out of the hearts of the being. And there's two, the full Tonglen practice is that we take the black smoke into our hearts. We imagine that we're wanting to relieve the suffering from the beings in the form of black smoke, and we put our self-cherishing tendency, our mind, right in the middle, like a big black rock, and the suffering of the other beings melts the rock, melts our self-cherishing thought, like an explosion. So this is the visualization of the full Tonglen practice. Some teachers actually say if that makes us uncomfortable, because some people could find that just too overpowering, we can visualize the black smoke going up out of the beings we're wishing to have happiness to outer space, beyond space, where it can do no harm. And then we can slowly work towards, over time, bringing the visualization into our hearts and destroying our own self-centeredness. So that's the in-breath. Got the other option there. So then the out-breath is we wish every part of our own happiness that we've ever experienced, all our own success, in the form of white light, going out to the hearts of the beings, and going straight into the hearts and giving them all success, happiness, joy, of all kinds of happiness, both temporal and ultimate happiness, going into the hearts of other beings with the out-breath. How wonderful it would be if certain beings have happiness. We acknowledge that until we're enlightened, we're actually vision, it's simulated. We know that the people are still suffering, but to be able to make progress, we have to overcome our tendency to not want to do the practice and push past that and actually do, just like the pilots who are trying to fly a plane will always use the simulator until they're actually able to fly a real plane. So we use this visualization to acquaint ourselves with this way of thinking, putting others' happiness before ourselves. So just by any habit, if we do it often enough, it becomes easier and easier. I'm speaking from that, not that I have made any progress myself, make that clear. This is just what the great masters and all the teachers say. It's something that we should always realise that we're starting with baby steps, and we need to make the start and make it will become easier over time. So so we can actually, I think they usually recommend when we're doing the practice to spend some time just focusing on the in-breath, and then sometimes focusing, it's just a few minutes, and then changing, because it's easy, until we get more adept at the practice, then we can perhaps change with each in and out breath, alternate visualization. But if at the beginning, it's good to just focus a few minutes on each step. First of all, focusing on the out breath, and focusing on the in breath. Okay, and then at the end, they said it's very good to think that how wonderful that I've been able to do this practice, and imagine if actually created happiness. The light has actually gone to the hearts of the other being, and you have given them all our happiness and joy. We've passed it over to them. So that's so just basically that's sort of an outline of the actual meditation, which we'll give a go, we'll try. Just before we do it, though, there's some really, His Holiness gives some really very powerful teachings at the end of this chapter. He particularly mentions that first of all, he says it's best to start with our own particular group of people that we know. So if we know somebody in our circle who's sick, who's having difficulties, rather than just try to suddenly imagine the whole world, just focus on particular instances in our life where we know somebody has had, say, a loss of a loved one, some physical illness, some mental problem, maybe relationship breakdown, work problem. So we can bring to mind these particular people and use the giving and taking meditation to apply to these specific people. So if we start with the people who we're close to, then we can gradually expand it to others who are less close to, and then to strangers, and then to even people we don't like. So that's the way of gradually doing it bit by bit. So just quoting His Holiness, practicing the mental trainings of love and compassion over time, our compassion will increase to the point where they become great resolve. Okay. So the other thing, he gives a terrific story. I just mentioned, very graphic. When the Nalanda monastery in India was like the centre of Buddhist studies many hundreds of years ago, in India, where is the seat of all Buddhist study. And these invaders came and actually destroyed the whole monastery from the north. Moguls, I think they were. And they also executed many monks. And so some of these monks were practitioners of Tonglen, and they asked to be able to pray before they were executed. And what they used was this prayer that we have in the, if you've ever done the Guru Puja, Guru Puja just has one verse about Bodhichitta, and I'll quote it to you. It's right at the end of the practice. It says, this thus venerable compassionate Gurus inspire me to give all negative negativities, obscurations, sufferings, inspire me so that all negativities, obscurations and sufferings of Mother Being ripe upon me right now, and I give my happiness and virtue to others, securing all wanderers in bliss. So I take all the negativities, I give all my happiness and virtue to others, securing all wanderers in bliss. But that's the prayer he said that they actually did pray just before they were executed. This shows how this particular monk was a true practitioner. So ordinary beings would have normally have so much fear that they wouldn't be able to even focus the mind to do a prayer, let alone one that's so powerful as that, with giving and taking. Okay, so we'll so what I'm doing is just using particular meditation. If you've got the materials for this module in the transcript of Venerable K. Minor's teachings on the whole Bodhichitta, at the end of that there's several meditations. This is meditation 7, equalizing and exchanging self and others. So it's just, if you want to do it at home, it's there in the materials. According to my page numbering, it's 129, page 129 of those materials that I sent out. Okay, so it's actually prepared by Connie Miller, very experienced senior nun in FPMT. So she's actually does this, written in the actual practice. All right, so get comfortable, and I'll just briefly lead you through the practice. Remember that with the taking and giving, you can either visualize the black smoke going out into space, or you can try visualizing it coming into your heart and destroying the self-centeredness that is holding us back. So that's destroyed by the black smoke. Okay, whatever's the most comfortable. Okay, so we just begin by getting comfortable. A few moments breathing meditation. So we begin our practice on exchanging self for others by starting with just meditating on equanimity. That means that we imagine a friend, enemy, a stranger in front of us, someone we're very close to, someone we're not close to that we feel uncomfortable with, and someone who's a stranger we have no particular feelings towards. Thinking that these three categories of people are actually all wanting happiness, not wanting suffering like us. That these categories are just something, an attitude we have in our own mind. Nothing exists in the minds of those beings to reflect the reality of friend, enemy, or stranger. And wishing, whether they're friend, enemy, or stranger, acknowledging that they all want happiness, they don't want suffering, just like us. Then, second step, thinking of the shortcomings of self-cherishing thought. All the suffering in the world comes from the desire to attain one's own happiness. All the great teachers have said this. All problems of suffering comes from self-cherishing thought. All the harm we've ever experienced, all the suffering we've ever experienced has come since the beginning of lives because of the self-cherishing thought. The third step, the advantages of cherishing others. All happiness in the world has come from cherishing others. Wealth, good fortune, even enlightenment and liberation all come from cherishing others, wishing others happiness. Then, exchanging self for others. Think about when we were a child, cutting the birthday cake. Our first thought was to get the biggest piece of cake. This typical of how the self-cherishing thought thinks. When we exchange self with others, we put others in the place previously occupied by ourselves. Think of the various ways we can put others first in our day-to-day life and in our thoughts. So then we start the Tonglen practice. First one, taking the suffering of others. This is generating compassion for others' suffering. Contemplate the various sufferings that other beings experience, the three types of suffering. We can think of a specific group, those who are sick, particularly those suffering from the coronavirus. We could perhaps think of those being oppressed, such as in Myanmar. Or others in our life that we know are having particular difficulties. Generating a wish to relieve this group, these people, these beings from the suffering. Thinking, may all these beings who are suffering be free of that suffering. So then we can think with each in-breath, we're taking in the suffering of other beings in the form of black smoke, out of the hearts of those beings. With each in-breath, taking them into our hearts and destroying our self-cherishing tendencies, attitude, like a powerful explosion with each in-breath. Or imagining in the black smoke, lifting off the sentient beings, relieving them from suffering, going beyond space. Just staying with that thought, relieving those beings suffering. You can think of particular instances, wishing them to relieve, to not have that suffering. Then we use the out breath to wish these suffering beings happiness. May they receive every type of happiness. Imagine we can breathe this form of happiness in the form of white light from our own hearts into the hearts of these sentient beings. Breathing and generating everything that these beings wish for with each out-breath. With each out-breath, generating all our own happiness, all the happiness and positive energy in the world, the universe, into the hearts of these beings in the form of white light. So then we just feel that great rejoicing and happiness that we can actually do this practice. We can feel that that practice has been successful. We have actually increased the level of happiness of all beings by doing this practice. And then we can generate the wish to cultivate bodhicitta, loving kindness, compassion. The only way I can benefit other beings is to completely take away their suffering, to bring them perfect, everlasting happiness. This means bringing them to enlightenment. The only way I can enlighten certain beings is to become enlightened myself and then lead them, teach them out of suffering into enlightenment. So then we can just dedicate any positive merit, positive imprints on our minds from this practice, from tonight's meditation teachings, all our positive actions done in the past, present, and future, towards the quality of developing bodhicitta, great compassion. By developing bodhicitta, may we develop enlightenment, become enlightened, and lead all other beings out of suffering into enlightenment. Just dedicating to that. So finally, I'll just read Lama Zopa's special dedication for the COVID-19 virus. However many sick sentient beings there are, may they quickly be freed from all sickness. May all the sickness in the world, without exception, of all transmigrating beings never occur again. Dedicating to that. Okay, that's it for tonight. Thanks for being here and there. And next week, we start a new module, new subject, transforming problems. Transforming problem. So that's the first class for that module. And then the week after that is Easter, so there'll be no class on Easter Monday. But next week we'll be here at the same time. So take care, have a good week, and stay well and dry. Bye.